back. Good to see you here to our journey together on exploring qualitative methodologies. I hope you are enjoying it and learning a lot how to conduct qualitative research. As in our previous videos, we already have covered some methodologies, qualitative methodologies. Today, we will learn another methodology, ethnography. Ethnography is one of the oldest, I would say it is the oldest qualitative method of conducting research. And this approach of conducting qualitative research has its roots in anthropology and sociology. So these are two disciplines which started this tradition of conducting research. And in both the traditions, what they did, they did they used to do a systematic study of a culture, a community, or a group, any social group. So anthropologists and sociologists are the first one who started ethnography as a tool, as a method, qualitative research designed to study cultures, communities, and social groups. In ethnography, and later on it was adopted broadly in other disciplines, other social science disciplines, to conduct qualitative research. So ethnography is the oldest tradition of conducting qualitative research. Now, what a researcher, what a sociologist, what an anthropologist does in ethnography. So as a researcher, what you do is you immerse yourself in a culture and study their maybe traditions, practices, their values and perceptions. You can study their rituals. You can study their social interactions. You can study the social structure. So in summary, what you do here is you are studying a culture. So that's what briefly about what a researcher does in ethnography research. Now let's switch gears and talk about what are some key features of an ethnography, how this method, this way of conducting qualitative research is similar or different from other qualitative approaches. So in ethnography, the hallmark feature, the most important feature which separates it from other traditions is participant observation. What is participant observation? As an ethnographer, as a researcher, you go and study a culture, you immerse yourself. So you go there not for a day or a week, you go there and immerse yourself in the culture, stay there for some significant amount of time. So it could be like a couple of months, maybe 1 year. And you do participant observation, meaning that you observe the people around you in their natural setting, how they interact, what are their practices, what are their traditional practices that they are involved, what are the rituals, what they value, what assumptions they have. So you are immersing yourself in that culture and you are doing participant observation. So one thing to keep in mind when it comes to participant observation in the context of ethnography is extended time, meaning in other qualitative researchers, what researchers do, you can do a participant observation, but let's say for a day, for an hour. So in other qualitative traditions, what happens, I can go and let's say if I am researching a particular teaching intervention, I can go sit in a classroom and observe the teacher teaching the class. So this observation, participant observation, is happening like maybe 1 hour, maybe one day in the school, and then I come back and write my observations. However, when I say ethnography and participant observation in under ethnography, it is for extended period of time. Generally, ethnographers spend at least a couple of months in a culture, in a community, to understand and explore their culture. So that's very important to keep in mind. In ethnography, participant observation is for extended time. And what it does is, it's very important that when you spend more time, why you spend more time? Because it helps you to deeply understand the culture, and you understand the culture in its like detail. Like, you are developing a in-depth understanding of the practices, rituals, cultures in detail. So participant observation is a key highlight. It's like a hallmark of ethnography. Another key feature of ethnography is holistic perspective. As I said previously, you spend a lot of time in the culture, you observe them, do participant observation. So it helps you to understand the culture or the group that you are studying in a holistic manner. So you have a very in-depth understanding of the culture. You not only understand their practices, their traditions, but you also see how those different factors are sort of interact with each other. So let's say uh, traditions, rituals, social structure, social interactions. So along with understanding these components of the culture, you also see how these different factors sort of interact with each other, how they are influencing each other. So how the social structure influence their social uh, values that they carry, how these social interaction influence their assumptions that they hold about day-to-day life. So all these factors, they are sort of interact and intersect with each other. So as an ethnographer, to develop a holistic perspective of the culture you are studying, you not only understand, try to explore these different components of the culture, but you also see how they intersect, how they influence each of these components. Another key feature of ethnography is, we call it culture relativism, cultural relativism. So when you go and spend time in another culture, observe their practices and everything, there is a possibility that you may unintentionally start judging other cultures' practices based on the standard that of your own culture. So if I grew up as a researcher, we grew up in a particular culture, right? And when we go to a different culture or a group or community to study, there is a possibility that we start judging those practices based on our own culture. And that becomes sort of a barrier in the examination, in the research process. So, what you do is, as a researcher, as an ethnographer, you set aside your own cultural values, you set aside your own uh, cultural practices or whatever culture you come from, so that you could develop a better understanding without judging those culture based on where you grew up. And this is called cultural relativism. So as a researcher, as an ethnographer, it's very important that you are aware of your own cultural practices, values, assumptions, traditions, interactions, social structures. And when you are observing, uh, you set aside your own cultural values as an ethnographer. So that's a very, very important point in the context of ethnography. Ethnographers also do another thing. They create a very thick description of the community culture they are observing. What I mean here is, thick description means, as an ethnographer, every day you are observing people in the culture, you are talking, you are interviewing. So, the life of an ethnographer looks like you start your day with with starting observations, meeting, talking to people, making notes, creating field notes. And in the evening, you sit and go through those notes and write your observations about what you are seeing there. So, what happens at the end of your journey of being in that culture, you have a huge pile of these descriptions about the cultures, your observations. So, ethnographers produced huge data. Sometimes it's like more than 1,000 pages of field notes, more than 1,000 pages of transcript of the interviews. So ethnographers produce a very thick description of the culture they are studying. And there is a reason why they do that, because when you produce a very thick description, meaning that you capture the context of everything that you are watching, everything you are observing, and that gives you develop a better understanding of those cultures. So thick description is a key feature of ethnography. Just understand that ethnographers create a lot of data, thousands and thousands of pages of data. Another key feature is Emic versus Etic perspective. So Emic perspective is, in a summary, you could say like it's an insider perspective. So in qualitative research, Emic perspective is the perspective of the people that you are studying. So let's say if I am studying a culture, so the people who are living in that culture, the members of that culture or social group, if I'm doing an interview, so that interview data is the perspective of those members of the community, and that we call it Emic perspective. Emic is insider perspective, so the perspective of the people that we are studying. Etic perspective is you could say, outsider perspective. So in that case, being a researcher, I'm an outsider. So my observation, my field notes are going to be Etic perspective, Etic data. As a ethnographer, you may want to have a balance between Emic perspective and Etic perspective. So meaning that yes, you are focused on collecting Emic data, which is like your interactions, your observations, your how people are talking about, how people are relating with all that. And then Etic perspective is, how do you describe your experiences? How do you look at those experiences? So as an ethnographer, you should be aware of Emic and Etic perspective, and in a way you try to find a balance between these two perspectives. Another key feature is flexibility and adaptability. Ethnographers are very flexible in terms of the research related decisions that or design related questions. So obviously you start your research and you start observing by being in the culture, in the community. But as you start the research process and immerse yourself in the data collection process, you are also open to changing your approach to data collection based on what you see, what you observe. So the research design, obviously it's in the beginning you have a framework in terms of how you're going to collect the data and other decisions that you are making in the research process. But as an ethnographer, you are also flexible in the sense like based on what challenges you may come across in that culture, in that community, you are open to tweak your research design a bit. You are open to tweak it a little bit in terms of like, okay, maybe interview may not be an effective way of collecting some data. So let's use some other ways of doing that. So flexibility and adaptability is also an important feature of ethnography. Another important feature is reflexivity. Researchers' reflexivity. So in all qualitative traditions, reflexivity is important. As a researcher, you want to be mindful of your own personal biases, your own personal cultural sensitivities, values, assumptions, and it helps you to better understand the people you are exploring, understanding by being aware of your own biases and values that you carry as a researcher. So ethnographers are required to be reflexive and always asking questions to themselves based on what they are being exposed to in the culture. So reflexivity is like being thoughtful, being aware, being mindful, uh, asking questions about like, okay, if I interpret this data in this way, is it the data itself or is it my own values, my own uh, cultural training sort of coming in and sort of influencing it? So you have to be reflexive, thoughtful about yourself as a researcher, because in that whole immersive process, you are using yourself as a tool to understand this phenomenon, this culture or community. So reflexivity is a very important skill, and it's required almost all qualitative research, particularly in ethnography. Another key feature is narrative reporting. So ethnographers, after collecting huge pile of data, when they write their report, they write in a narrative form, in a very story-based form. I don't know if you have read any ethnography, but ethnography is a very, unlike other research articles, ethnography is very powerful, evocative reading. So, so that's a very unique thing about ethnography, the way they write their research report. It has its objectivity, but telling those objective data in the form of a story make it very, very powerful reading. And I recommend you all, if you find you know uh, time or chance to read this ethnography, which I read when I was a doc student. It's an old book called Hard Living on Clay Street, a portrait of blue collar workers. So this is an ethnography written somewhere like early 1970s, and the ethnographer, he he studied this community of blue collar workers, like the factory workers, and the purpose was understanding the challenges that blue collar workers face in terms of their overall life. And this whole project was funded by the state government because they wanted to understand the challenges so that they can develop policies, economic policies, and social policies to bring change, positive change to this community. Very powerful reading. So I recommend, if you find a chance, to read this ethnography. So let's summarize it. So ethnography is a systematic study of a culture, a community, or any social group. And as an ethnographer, you do participant observation, you spend extended period of time in the community, in the culture. In fact, you live with them. You become part of the family, the community. You live with them, you see, you talk, you observe, you interview. So you completely immerse yourself in that process of understanding and learning about a community. And as I said, participant observation is a highlight of this method. And cultural relativism is also a very important point to consider when you think about ethnography. It's very common, I have seen that in our day-to-day life, whenever we, let's say, let's take an example. If I say, if you come across a person from a different culture and then you come to know like, oh, this person eats insects, raw insects or fried insects, maybe grasshopper or anything, and you might feel, oh my God, like because in your culture it's very like nobody can imagine eating insects. So we react in that way because we try to judge this person's culture based on the values and rituals and practices that based on our own cultural sensitivities and practices. So it's very important that when we think about a culture, when we study a culture, we set aside our own cultural values, our own cultural practices, and see as it is from the lens of the people of that culture rather than my own lens, my own cultural lens. So these are some briefly, this is briefly about what ethnography is. I hope it helps you to get some sense of what an ethnographer does and how It helps to understand a culture, a community. Thank you for being here. I hope it helps you to understand this whole concept, and I'll see you again. Thank you. Have a good day.